Hi, I'm Tom Shue, and today we're going to do a blog post on common mistakes beginning portrait photographers make. Okay, there's a series of images that have a lot of mistakes, and I just want to talk about a few of them. This first image, one of the common mistakes people make when they first start out is when they add a flash to a camera and then they take that camera outside. They have to learn how to control too many things. First thing they need to learn how to control is the ambient exposure, and then they have to deal with the flash exposure. Sure, you can go in TTL mode, but the camera's going to meter based off of the scene, and it's going to make everything dark if it's a bright scene, and make everything light if it's a dark scene. That's just the nature of your camera. So the idea is kind of to take manual control. In this image here, you can see that the ambient exposure, which is the clouds in the sky, and the grass area is blown out. It's white. There's no color in the sky. You can't see the clouds. So it's just blown out. If you zoom in, you can see that there was flash used, and I can kind of tell there was flash used. Okay, it's more of a fill flash than anything, but they didn't get their exposure dialed in. Always get your ambient exposure first, and then dial up your flash power to get the proper exposure on your subject. Worry about all the patterns of light and all that stuff later. Just get your exposure dialed in. Let's go to the next image. This image, you can see that they started to get the ambient exposure dialed in. You know, they could just darken the sky a little bit more by increasing the shutter speed, or they can make it less dark blue by lowering the shutter speed, letting more light in. But you can see that the exposure on the subject isn't right. It's a little bit low. So they're starting to get dialed in, but this isn't the problem of this image. The problem of this image is this. They shot from a low position, so they're shooting up the subject's nose, and she's in a profile view, and you can see the eyebrow on the other side. If you shoot anyone in profile, you want to make sure that you can't see the eyebrow, the brow area on the far side of the face. Also, you have to consider, is the profile position the most flattering for this subject? It takes kind of a certain kind of look to pull off profile, because if your nose is too big, it accentuates your nose and the attention is drawn to your nose. So there's better positions that you can flatter people, especially if they have unique noses. There's also a problem with this, is that there's no clean space for the head. The last problem I see is that this image was shot in portrait mode when I think it might have been better served shot in landscape mode. Let's take a look if we just recrop this. So grab our crop tool, and if we just, let me unlock it real quick. If we were just to say put the head in a clean space, and imagine, this extending horizontally. Let's clean this up a little bit. Maybe I'll rotate it just a hair to add more information here so you can see. Okay, so imagine the eyebrow gone. It's almost in profile mode, and if they'd have shot it in landscape mode and came to an angle that wasn't so low, this could have been an interesting shot. However, they chose to shoot it in portrait. But explore landscape and portrait mode when you're working. Also, try to pick poses that in positions and angles that flatter your subject. So let's look at the next one. Here's a classic one of head is not in a clean space. There's a saying, it's face in a clean space or head in a clean space. That means there's not a bunch of distracting elements behind your subject. Looks like they got the exposure dialed in for the ambient light, and they got the flash exposure good. You can start to see that there's some modeling on the face over here. Looks three-dimensional. And her nose from a forward view is better looking than from a side view. But they shot up her nose. So again, it's camera position, head in a clean space. Let's look at some more of these. This one here looks pretty good. I think this one should have been shot in portrait mode, and I also think that the depth of field is a little bit too great on this image. Let's look at what aperture they shot it at. They shot it at f16. Okay, f16 is going to show a lot of skin blemishes in her face. You see all this exfoliation that needed to take place? Well, that's okay. It doesn't have to be exfoliated, and you won't see that if you shoot at a softer aperture, like somewhere around f4 versus f16. Also, this tree wouldn't be a distracting element. They're starting to play with posing a little bit, but I don't think a 2/3 view is her best view, and I think whoever's shooting should have got up on a ladder and shot down a little bit, so you're not shooting up into their nostril and their nose. Okay, let's look at this one here. This is a profile, and it looks pretty nice. There's some good lighting on the face. You can't see the eyebrow on the other side of the face. Again, the aperture is a little bit too much. The color's maybe a little bit too saturated in the background. But overall, it's not a bad image. I would have shot this in horizontal, in landscape mode instead of vertical. Brought the frame out this way, and maybe loosened up, and maybe cropped right on down onto the top of her hair, and just taking it out. But I'd maybe lift her ear in the frame. It's kind of hard to compose when you fill the frame that far as with rule of thirds, but you might be able to put this eye over here or over here. But basically the eye will become a point of interest, and it needs to be at the here, 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 or here. Let's look at where the actual rule of thirds falls. These are the points of interest, so her eye needs to go up here, or at least be on this line, which means that this crop would be down here like this. It's hard to do this with maintain the aspect ratio that it was shot at. So we kept the eye close to this point of interest. Might have been a little different looking image. I'm not saying it's good or bad. Saying let's look at it. That's a little bit too much for my taste. Let's reset this. And let's just try cropping it just a little bit differently. Maybe something like that. Looks a little bit better than before, but you have the distracting element in the back. And I guarantee that's because the aperture is too small. Let's look at this. Again, f16. You can fix that in post with blur, but I probably would not shoot at f16. So beware of what aperture you're shooting at. Here again, it's composition. Rule of thirds doesn't fall into play. The horizon line's kind of off. They might want to think about shooting from a tripod up tall or shooting down. A little bit higher would have been a lot beneficial in composition. So look at your head in a clean space. Got a light pole growing out. Aperture's too small. You're shooting with not enough depth of field. And position of your subject needs to be addressed. Let's look at some of the good things that may happen here. You can see this, the lighting is a little bit off, the exposure's off, and the aperture's kind of too deep. There's too much depth of field because of the trees and stuff are in focus. Those could have been blurred out with the aperture, but you can do that in post. But there's some nice modeling on the face. You want to pick a pose that flatters your subject. The lighting's good. Maybe took the hair out of the eye a little bit, but it's getting closer. Now here's their final image, and the lighting pattern looks good. It looks Rembrandtish. I think that the exposure is a little bit under, so always look at your exposure when you make your images. Don't just go through and shoot a series of images and hope that you got it right. Make sure you got it right. At least got it right to the point where you can post work it, but I'm not into post working a lot of images. I don't mind post working one or two of a series, but definitely want to get all my images consistent. So consistent exposure is another thing I don't see. Frame to frame consistency. So I took one of these images and I post worked it a couple times. It's a little dramatic, but you can see that even that image that they had could be made into something pretty unique. I know that's a lot over the top. However, all isn't lost if you don't nail your exposure right. You can post-work things. Last thing I would have done is just blur out this background elements, and it'd be a pretty nice looking portrait. Here's the last thing you'll see that happens from people that are just starting out, is they overdo it. This one's just too much. It's too far over the top. Um, I mean, this eye is kind of cool, but it's just way too fake. So be careful when you post process. Don't overdo it. Okay? Thanks for taking time to visit my blog today, and I hope some of the beginning photographers that visit my blog found some of this information helpful. I hope you all have a wonderful day, and until next time, we'll see you soon.